Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer, back with more Golgari gameplay for you. Let's see what we've got here. We are on the draw. We have a nice spread of 3 lands. We have some interaction with our land base, with the enemy's land base, rather. And we have both colors. We have Painless Land. So far, so good. And we have a nice variety of interaction. We have our most efficient spot removal. We have our flexible removal. And we have some late game threats. I like this hand a lot. Let's see what the opponent does. They're going to keep 7. We're going to keep 7. Okay. Blackcleave Cliffs into Inquisition. Alright. Looks like we are against some kind of a black-based midrange deck. Could be Mardu, could be Jund. That's what we're thinking right now. There are other decks that it could be as well, but those are probably the 2 most likely. They're going to take away our Liliana the Last Hope. Sure. We'll draw a Treetop Village. Alright. So we could play a Blooming Marsh if we were interested in holding up Fatal Push, but that's less appealing because they know we have it. So we're going to go ahead and just take this opportunity to deploy our Manland. See what the opponent can come back with. It's yet another discard spell. Sure. They take away our Brutality. Interesting. Alright. Verdant Catacomb, so this is looking more and more like Jund. Scavenging Ooze, huh? Pretty good draw, actually. And we're going to deploy the Scavenging Ooze, so I'll take a moment to talk about this. If you are in a BGX mirror match, which we seem to be, it's a little sketchy sometimes when you are on the draw, especially, to play a 2-drop on curve, because then they get kind of the maximum value of playing a Liliana of the Veil on curve, ticking her down to Edict us, and then they can tick her up at their leisure. That just is a really mana efficient, really tempo efficient, really high value play. To be able to Lily on curve and Edict. So why did I do it anyway? Well, number one, they've ripped up our hand enough that we still don't really want to play the tracker until turn 4 if possible. So that's kind of a long time to go without deploying a threat. More importantly, we're willing to do this because we have Treetop Village. This is why this card is amazing. So if they do indeed play a 3rd land, play a Liliana, and Edict us, we can crack back with a Treetop Village next turn. We didn't plan to play the tracker anyway, and that means we trade evenly with the Liliana. We trade 1 card for 1 card, and that is just fine with us. Now, if they don't have the Liliana, so much the better, because we get to have a threat in play. So, normally you want to be wary of walking a 2-drop into a Lily when you're on the draw, but in this case, thanks to Treetop, I think it is perfectly fine. The opponent will fetch. Now the fact that they've got red, black land again makes me believe that they do indeed have a 3rd land, which they do, and they'll pass. So I wonder if they are sitting on a Liliana and they're a little bit unwilling to trade her for the Scavenging Ooze, which is basically what she'd be doing. If so, our sequencing has paid off. We're drawing more lands, which is okay as long as we can get this tracker down next turn. You know, if they have another discard spell next turn, we'll be a little sad. But in the meantime, we're going to stick to the plan. We'll crack in with the Scavenging Ooze. And we're just going to play our Field of Ruin and pass. Now, Field of Ruin is nice here because it lets us, if we want to Fatal Push something, we can get the Revolt trigger if we need to, or we can just field for value at the end of the turn if they show us a Manland. All those things are fine reasons to lead on that. and we're definitely sure this is Jund now, by the way. They're just going to pass. Now, I missed a little bit of a trick there. I should have end step just eaten their Inquisition and Thoughtseize. There's no real reason not to. So I forgot to do that. I intended to, just kind of hurriedly clicked through that. We draw Tarmogoyf. Okay, that's fine. That's a fine draw. So we're still interested in the tracker here now. So once again, we are going to start off by getting in with the use. Opponent still has nothing to say about it. They're sitting on 4 cards. So either they're holding up removal for a higher priority target, or maybe they have some Bloodbraid Elves in hand. Maybe they are still sitting on a Liliana. Who knows? But time for the value. Tireless Tracker. Fetch land. Pass the turn holding up Fatal Push. Or maybe they're just flooded. They have made all 5 land drops. They have a Scooz of their own. Sure. Alright. So here we're going to fetch on the end step, and our opponent will respond Assassin's Trophy on the tracker. So they're denying us the second clue. Sure. Yep, that's a fine play. We're going to get a forest and a swamp here. We want the swamp because we're interested in fatal pushing the ooze right now. And then we want the forest so we can activate the ooze. Feels pretty good. Feels like we're in a decent position. They clearly don't have a fatal push, or they would have used it by now on this ooze. And we're drawing more threats. Okay. So this is game 1. We are not playing around wrath effects. We are more or less interested in just kind of flooding the board with threats. But we also want to be careful to get maximum value out of all of our, the utility we have on board. We have the clue, we have the use, we have the fuel to ruin. So making this thing a 4/4 feels pretty good. It's out of bolt range. It can trade favorably with Bloodbraid Elf. And so, yeah, as nice as that clue is, we're just going to play our Tarmogoyfs. And we're going to hold the swamp in hand because that represents value in a couple different ways. It can potentially bait a discard spell out of them. They're like, it looks like a good window for them to resolve one, because if it's an instant, we can't fire it off in a response because we're all tapped out. So it could bait the discard, and it also is just something we can hold up for Tireless Tracker or Collective Brutality value. Pass the turn. Ha! Sure enough, there's the Inquisition. It's going to whiff. And they just play a land and scoop. So presumably the last card in their hand was another land, or maybe a removal spell that was just not going to be enough. Because if they kill our ooze, our Tarmogoyfs become 5/6s, and if they kill a Tarmogoyf, then the other Tarmogoyf is 5/6 plus the ooze, can also eat the dead Goyf to become a 5-power creature. So either way, we had it wrapped up. Pretty comprehensive win here. Now let's look at what happened. So they led off with, on the play, Inquisition into Thoughtseize, right? And we didn't really interact back. We played a Scavenging Ooze turn 2, and then we did nothing until our tracker on turn 4. So it seems on paper like a stronger start for them. They took away our Liliana the Last Hope and our Collective Brutality. So, in my opinion, the opponent... I'm not necessarily sure why the opponent did not take away Tireless Tracker. Maybe they thought they were likely to find a removal spell for it. They probably play 4 Lightning Bolts, some number of Fatal Push. They did have the Assassin's Trophy. Maybe they have some Brutalities as well. So maybe they're just thinking they're going to take away our interaction and they're going to draw into interaction of their own for the tracker. But in my opinion, even letting us get that first clue off of tracker was potentially a missed trick on the opponent's part. Now, that said, we didn't even crack the clue. We didn't need to. We just drew a bunch of Tarmogoyfs off the top. That's another good way to win a game. So, our top decks were kind to us, but I think we navigated the match well, and yeah, it was a good game. So let's move to the sideboard, see how we are going to kit out for the Jund match. Alright, we are here to sideboard against Jund. So, Nihil Spellbomb is quite good. It's a good way to empty out their graveyard, obviously, without going down on cards. I wouldn't really be interested in siding in cards like Rest in Peace against Jund. In general, obviously would never run Rest in Peace in a deck like this, but cards like Nihil Spellbomb and Relic of Progenitus are acceptable because they replace themselves. Attacking their graveyard is fine, but we don't want to go down on card advantage to do so. So Spellbomb is pretty good. Kalidas is great. This is an attrition matchup. He's a big threat. He's going to get a lot of value if we can leverage our removal with him on board. He's going to help stabilize, especially useful against Jund in terms of life total, because Jund can pressure you a little bit quicker than most BGX decks with that's what the Red Splash does, basically. So Kalidas is good. More removal is always good. We're bringing in the Pulse. Golgari Charm, not so much. They didn't show us any X1 creatures, and even if they did, I don't know that we're interested anyway. The regen mode is cute here, but we have better cards to bring in. We're not interested in more discard. In fact, we're going to cut most, if not all, of ours. This is a grindy matchup. We want the Nissa. Pretty simple. She can end the game if we're in a position to end the game, or she can grind if we need to grind. She's very, very good at both. Choke does nothing. Fulminator is interesting. I have always liked him historically against Jund and against other BGX decks in the mirrors, but I don't know if Assassin's Trophy makes him worse. Assassin's Trophy means that we're not realistically going to cut them off a color. He's just kind of like a removal spell for a manland, basically, so we'll put him in the maybe category right now. Same with Brutality. It's fine, but we're probably honestly cutting some from the main. It's playable, but we'll see. Damnation is great. Damnation goes in. Languish is a maybe, again, because I didn't see enough of their creatures. I don't know if they're on Dark Confidants, then I do want the Languish, but if they're playing kind of like a Jund Trackers build that goes a little bit bigger, if they're playing Tasigur, I still think Languish is fine because they're almost certainly on Bloodbraid Elf, but they just didn't show us enough, so I don't know if I need to bring it in. We also have Engineered Explosives, which is more great removal, and we have Obstinate Bailoff. So these are 8 very, very good cards in the matchup. We can go ahead and just toss all of those in. We might look back at this Languish. Let's take a look at what comes out, right? So let's go ahead and begin by cutting all 6 of our 1-mana discard spells. Are they fine in the matchup? Yes, they're fine, but this is a match where each player will be trying to run the other out of resources, and while discard is an effective way to do that, eventually one or both players are going to be in top deck mode. That's just how the games play out. So these being your worst possible top decks, as far as spells go, it is commonly accepted that the way you play the BGX mirrors is to take out the discard. Now, not everybody does that. I've kind of done it since I started playing the archetype, and it has always felt correct to me. So we'll get rid of those. Looking at the rest of the deck, it all looks really good. Honestly, if we were against Abzan with Lingering Souls, then you could cut some number of Lilies, but against Jund, I still think she's quite good. I think we need to lose a Brutality, and then probably an Assassin's Trophy, as good as it is in terms of flexibility, we're still going to have access to 3, and these other cards, its competitors, are all very, very good in the matchup. So that's what I'm pretty confident in against a normal Jund deck. Again, Languish could come in. Definitely could see that coming in, but I'm happy to leave it in the side for now. We'll see if we need to play a Game 3, maybe. Alrighty, we are back for Game 2 against Jund. We are on the draw, and our hand is fantastic. Once again, we have an eerily similar 3 lands to what we opened on in Game 1. The only difference is we have a Quagmire instead of a Treetop Village, I believe. But we have a Manland, we have Field of Ruin, and our mana is Painless. We have 3, we have both colors. That's perfect. Fatal Push is great, Scavenging Ooze is great, Tireless Tracker is great, and Obstinate Baloth is fantastic, especially post-board, because like I said, it's kind of common for BGX players to side out their discard. So if they don't know, they don't have targeted discard, they might not know we have them, and they might just blindly play the Liliana on turn 3, tick her up, and we get to blow them out with the Baloth. So that's really good. This is an obvious keep, and our opponent keeps 7-2, so we are in no free wins here. You know, we're going to grind them out. Okay, so our opponent is not on the plan of bringing out their discard. Maybe they only left a couple in. Maybe they don't quite have as many cards to bring in. I could see that. Or maybe they're of the school of thought that the discard is still where you want to be. So they will resolve an Inquisition. This time they're just going to get our tracker out of hand right away. I think that's never incorrect. We find another Field of Ruin. Okay, not terribly exciting, especially since we lost our tracker, but the game is young. So our opponent plays a Raging Ravine and passes. We draw Damnation. Okay, so last game, I was on the draw, and I had a Scavenging Ooze on 2, just like here, and I was willing to run out the Ooze on 2. Here, circumstances are very different. Number 1, I have Quagmire instead of Treetop Village. Quagmire is too expensive to activate and swing in with next turn. So if I run a Scooz out into Lily, I cannot kill her immediately on the crackback and trade evenly. That is strike 1 against playing the Scooz right now. Strike 2 is they do have a Swamp Up. They could just be holding Fatal Push. And strike 3 is we just drew this Damnation, so we might want to kind of coax the opponent into developing their board while we play way more conservatively in that regard. So all things considered, we just are happy to pass the turn here. So our opponent goes land and pass. Now here, again, you have to wonder if they're sitting on a Liliana. Maybe they are savvy enough to expect or at least fear the Baloth. I'm sorry, they wouldn't even have to expect it. They have seen it with the Inquisition. So, yeah, maybe they have a Liliana, but they're not going to play her just to do nothing. You know, they're not going to play her without a target on the field to edict. So that's something to be reasonably suspicious of, that the opponent has a Liliana of the Veil in hand. Now, we draw Collective Brutality. Here, it's perfectly acceptable to fire off the Brutality, but we are against Jund. I do still, even though I have not seen them, expect that they have Dark Confidants in the deck, so yeah, it's kind of a borderline. I don't know that there's a correct choice to Brutality or not to Brutality. I do know that if we would Brutality here, we would not escalate because our hand is great. We would just discard mode only, but I chose to just play it close to the chest here and pass. Opponent will fetch on the end step. Opponent will play a Kitchen Finks. Okay, that one's a little bit annoying. However, we do have, it's not the end of the world. their life gain is not the most relevant. We're not usually in a race mode, and even in a grindy deck like this where there's a lot of back and forth, we're usually going to take over the game pretty comprehensively if we're going to win it at all. Still, it's a nice little brick wall. It's a recursive threat. We do have the Scavenging Ooze. If we can find a window to resolve it, then we can push the Finks and what. So how you do this is Finks will go to the graveyard if it dies. Then its persist trigger goes on the stack. When that trigger goes on the stack, you eat it out of the graveyard with a Scavenging Ooze. You don't have to deal with the back half of Finks. So if anyone's not sure exactly how that works, that is how it is. Opponent shows us another Raging Ravine. So for that reason, even though it's going to give the opponent an untapped basic, which could potentially not be great going into our turn, I think we have to start using these Fields of Ruin while we have the mana free to do so. So our opponent will have a Mountain. Makes me slightly suspicious of Lightning Bolt, or maybe they're just fixing their mana. We're going to draw a Swamp. Alright. So there are a couple options here. We could consider perhaps hard casting the Obstinate Baloth, right? They already know about it. They're not going to walk into it blindly. But the more I thought about that, the more I didn't really like it, because if they are indeed sitting on a Liliana, that's really good for us that they haven't been able to play their Lily yet. I kind of want to keep that going. So playing the Baloth, it would get us the value, the ETB value of 4 life, but I still kind of like him sitting in our hand. We could also just Damnation to kill the first half of the Finks. That feels terrible. So we'll pass yet again. We're continuing to play patient. We again, once more, we could have Brutality'd, but I just don't see a major reason to rush that decision quite yet. We're not under much pressure to speak of. We're going to take our first hit of the game, just for 3. Not that bad. The other nice thing about not doing anything there is it lets us hold up Raging Ravine. Now, if they did try to go all in on the Ravine, we could Fatal Push it, and that's not too bad, but we have a clean answer to their land using our own land, you know? I would rather use my spell to trade with one of their spells and use my land to trade with one of their lands. There are windows where Fatal Pushing a Raging Ravine is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but in this, the way this game is playing out, I want all of my resources available. And this, of course, can only kill lands. This can kill lands or creatures. So for that reason, I'm pretty happy to have the Field of Ruin available to me here on the end step. We'll go ahead and get rid of the Ravine. 2 Ravines down this early in the game feels very good. Assassin's Trophy. Okay, we're continuing to draw interaction, so that's a fine draw. We're still in the same spot, though, where none of our plays feel particularly amazing. So we're finally going to use this Brutality, and still, our hand is great. There's no need to get aggressive with escalation here. So we're just going to see what they've got in hand. Okay, opponent is Kolagin's Commanding. So they're going to target us, have us discard, and they're going to hit us for 2. So as far as Kolagin's Command goes, I'm very happy to get this out of their hand right now for a couple reasons. Number 1, the best mode on K-Command in this matchup is generally them returning a creature from the graveyard to the hand, especially if it's Kitchen Finks. Imagine if we had to kill this thing twice, and then they get it back, and we have to kill it twice again. That would be awful. So the fact that one of their modes has to be just shock us for 2, that feels great. And of course, when they make us discard, we get to just say, okay, here's an Obstinate Baloth. Thanks for that. Now, our opponent did know about the Baloth, and remember, it seems like they've kind of been playing around it, so I'm sure they have a plan for it. I don't assume that they just forgot about it, but so maybe this was kind of the cleanest way to get it out of our hand, and then they'll deal with it later. But still, even if they're consciously accepting that, it's still very good for us. So now our Brutality will resolve, and that's not as good for us. So we were right about the Liliana Reed. They do have that. They're going to probably play her next turn. And they have 2 Bloodbraid Elves. That's very bad for us. That's a lot of grindy value. So, okay, our Brutality will whiff. So what we're going to do here is play the Scavenging Ooze. So we're kind of abandoning the Damnation plan for now. It's just not realistic when they're leading on a Kitchen Finks and then now they can play the Liliana next turn. They just don't have any incentive to develop their board. The onus is on us. So now, at least we can have a choice in terms of whether we want to sack the Ooze or the Baloth to the Liliana Edict, if indeed they play her. And maybe this disincentivizes them from playing her. Maybe they'll just kind of roll the dice with a Bloodbraid Elf. So I like playing the Ooze here. We can still hold up Fatal Push as well. And we can still hold up a Scavenging Ooze activation. So while that was not an ideal turn for us by any means, it was an interesting one. That is for sure. So opponent will fetch. They'll untap. And okay, they're going to go for the Lily. Sure. Here comes an Edict. Yep. Yeah, so, there are arguments for both, but just in terms of how Baloth lines up against the Finks and the 2 Bloodbraids in their hand, I kind of like pitching the Ooze here. So we just pitch the Ooze. Opponent found a land, so they still have 2 Bloodbraids in hand. So this is actually... Let's see what we get. We get the Liliana, the Last Hope. Okay. I like that draw a lot. So this lets us be very aggressive here. So without showing them anything, we're going to swing in with the Baloth, trying to get the Liliana, the Veil off the table. Of course they take the block, why wouldn't they? It's a great block. They get the persist value, they get to gain 2 life, they get to keep their Planeswalker alive. The second main phase, however, we get a nice clean answer to the Kitchen Finks. So we actually have not gone down on cards at all to take care of this persist creature. Feels very good. And now we can simply pass. We're holding up Assassin's Trophy or Fatal Push, not both. But unfortunately, we will not have access to a Revolt trigger for Bloodbraid Elf unless they kill our Baloth first. But we can still protect our Liliana pretty well. Even if it's just a Bloodbraid coming at her and we can't stop it or we don't want to stop it, she's still around. That said, we kind of want to keep her above 1. Bloodbraid would put her down to 1. Because that way we can minus her for value. There might even have been an argument for minusing her right out of the gates to get our Tireless Tracker back, just because that is so powerful in this matchup. Getting back anything is really quite good. Just like Kolagan's Command Best mode is the Raised Dead mode. Same with Liliana. But that kill on the Persisted Finks was too clean to pass up. Still an argument for the -2 there, though. So we'll just hope we can keep her healthy this turn. Yep, opponent's going to roll the dice with the Bloodbraid Elf. And they're going to cascade into a Scavenging Ooze. Okay, that's a good one. It does not immediately pressure our Liliana, though, but it is a very good find. And their Lily's going to tick up. Now, their board is starting to look a lot wider than mine. So there's an interest in keeping the Damnation, but by that point I had decided that I'm going to hit the Bloodbraid Elf with Assassin's Trophy. So with that in mind, it's just, I'm going to, if Liliana doesn't get lightning bolted or something, I'm going to -2 her next turn. I'm going to take something back and then probably play it. Fatal Push is going to be more mana efficient. And Fatal Push can take care of the Scavenging Ooze too. So, and of course, neither of these result in my Baloth dying, which Damnation would. So, Not necessarily the easiest choice in the world there, but I think pitching Damnation was correct. They pitch a Raging Ravine, which honestly makes me pretty happy. That's a tough one to deal with when we're getting low on resources. And yeah, we're going to hit this thing with the Assassin's Trophy. So their Bloodbraid turned into a 3-for-1 for them. That's pretty good. But you know what? That is also just fine for us, because we get to untap with our Liliana the Last Hope, nice and healthy. So I decided to Fatal Push this first. Maybe I should have minus the Liliana first. You know, either way, I think he would have done what he does here and eaten the tracker. Probably doesn't matter much, but yep, so sure enough, our tracker is no longer available to us, but that's fine because Scavenging Ooze is a great one as well. And we can still find something else off of the self-mill. We do not. We mill a Maelstrom Pulse into land, so we get our Skoos back. Yep. So before showing them anything else, we're going to try to finish off this Liliana. And we do, and our opponent's down to 1 card in hand, so we're sitting pretty well. So we're pretty clearly going to play the Scavenging Ooze here. Arath would be pretty bad. Arath would be a clean 2-for-1, but even that would not be the worst, because again, we still have the Last Hope. We can either tick her up to start taking over the game, or cash her in if need be. And we are... there's an argument for maybe playing the Nile Spellbomb with that Forest, and then we can hold up either a Skoos activation or the Spellbomb. But here I am kind of happier to clear out his graveyard a little bit and get up out of bolt range. That feels pretty good, and out of Kalagan's command range as well. So our Spellbomb will sit in hand for now, and we will pass. Opponent's got 1 card in hand. They draw a second. We know one of them is what's coming up here, which is a Bloodbraid Elf. They'll cascade into Assassin's Trophy. Okay, their cascades are doing pretty well. They're going to just immediately get rid of the Scavenging Ooze. We get our Consolation Prize. And they get to finish off the Liliana. So that's unfortunate, but, you know... we did everything we could. That's the other thing I forgot to mention about the benefit of ticking up Skoos there, is if they had not cascaded into a trophy or drawn 1 for turn, the Ooze would have brickwalled the Bloodbraid Elf. So I think we took the right line, but Bloodbraid Elf is a heck of a card. Alright, Blooming Marsh is a pretty bad draw. So we're pretty happy here to lead off on the Spellbomb, and then crack it, clear out their graveyard, get a redraw, and that is much better. There's our good friend, the Tarmogoyf. And look at, after all of these plays, we're on turn 8, and we've interacted heavily. And our good old Obstinate Baloth that we got for free is still putting in work. He's walled off a couple attacks, he's killed the Liliana of the Veil, and now he's starting to crack in for 4. He's going to win the race against Bloodbraid Elf. He would on his own. A 6-7 Tarmogoyf is not a bad sidekick to have in that regard. And for the same reasons we held up our land drop in Game 1, we're going to hold up the land drop in Game 2. If he's got more discard, it can bait it out. Otherwise, it is fodder for Brutality or a clue off of Tracker. No reason to play this out right now. Even though it's a tapped land, still, we have more than enough mana to do basically anything. Alright, let's see what our opponent can find. Kalidas, Trader of Get. That's a good one. That's a really, really good one. And when I see him tap for black mana, I'm terrified of Fatal Push right now. That would be a big blowout. Fortunately, they have a Dark Confidant. Definitely would have gone from roughly even to way behind if they had had a push or other removal spell there. That said, the Dark Confidant, they're still at 18 health. You know, this guy can pull them ahead, so we definitely still need to find some top deck answers now. But for the moment, Goyf will wall off their attacks. And let's see what we can do. Oh, there he is. She? There she is? I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell. There you are, Tireless Tracker. There you are. One of my favorite cards in the deck. Obviously, we Windmill Slam this. And we'll play the Blooming Marsh and get our clue. Now, I don't see any reason to be cute. We're just going to crack the clue right now, because if we have a... there are a lot of things we can find that make sense here. Liliana the Veil's not one of them, but we could have found a Nile Spellbomb that we could have deployed. We could have found Fatal Push. There are... I'm not that afraid of their discard where I'm going to just only crack the clue on their end step, So, let's send in the goons. They don't have any great blocks. There's no way they can get much value out of Kalitas here. The best they can do is trade Bloodbraid Elf and Dark Confidant for my 1 Baloth, and then they'll get a 2/2 zombie as a consolation prize. I don't think that's probably worth doing. Then again, it depends on how highly they value the Confidant's draws. So, kind of a tough choice for our opponent here. We're swinging in for 10. That's quite a lot, and they just take it. Okay, I don't really disagree. I think you want at least 1 draw with a Confidant. They found a Black Cleave Cliffs off the bob. Sure. Not very good, but at least it's painless, and at least it gets a dead draw out of the way. And they find another Confidant. Okay, once again, I was kind of wincing in anticipation of a removal spell, but they're just finding more card draw. Still, not necessarily what they wanted to see. We find a Nile Spellbomb. Okay. Not very good. We're obviously not interested in clearing out our own graveyard at this point. So basically, as things stand, it's just a 2-mana cantrip. And I guess we might as well start off by doing that. I don't think we need to quite attack with Hissing Quagmire yet, so let's just cash this in, targeting them, and see what we can find. Another Tireless Tracker. Alright. At this point, we don't really need that, but, if we run into... let's say they start having to chump block and then they top deck a Wrath, Tireless Tracker will help us rebuild after that, so it's still a fine draw. But for now, we are going to deploy the Liliana. Now, it might be, let's say I wanted to attack first, making the same attacks I did last turn, and then play the Liliana after the fact. That's something I considered. But then I said, well, if I just attack in, they're probably going to double block my Baloth with the 2 Dark Confidants, go down to 2, and get a zombie. Then I play the Liliana, they sacrifice the zombie to her Edict effect, and then they can still find some really good top decks to let Kalitas kind of start taking over the game. Or maybe they sacrifice Bloodbraid Elf to the Edict and try to make Kalitas a huge lifelinker. And if they draw a Fatal Push for my Goyf, this could get bad. I don't know. So, in order to not give them that clean trade, I kind of wanted to main phase this Liliana, Edict. Basically, they're only going to sack a Confidant there. Now, even if things go wrong, we're at least going to push some damage through before things go wrong. And their Confidant triggers could kill them. I'm still at a really high life total. So, that's why I sequenced the way I did. And once again, we're going to send in the big goons and we're going to keep back the tracker. We don't want to give them clean trades here. They're not sure, and then they just decide to chump. Confidant trigger, once again, reveals a land. So they take 4 from the Baloth, they're at 4, and they scoop. Alright, so we got their 2-0 against Jund. Now, what did we learn from this second match? Well, I think these matches were pretty cool because it shows, like I said, there were some strange parallels between my opening hand game 1 and game 2, especially in terms of the 3 lands that I had and the fact that Scavenging Ooze was my turn 2 threat, and the fact that I was on the draw. So just to review, game 1, we had a Treetop Village in play, so we were more than happy to play the Skoos out into a possible turn 3 Liliana of the Veil edicting us, because we can kill her on the crackback. The fact that they didn't have it, or if they did have it, they chose not to do it, meant that we got to be proactive with our Scavenging Ooze, we got to get aggressive, we got to put them under pressure. So the fact that we weren't just kind of blindly scared of the Liliana and just didn't do anything, the fact that we kind of reasoned it out and said, well, you know, if we kill her on the crackback with the Treetop, we don't probably want to do anything turn 3 anyway, that's totally fine. That ended up being really, really good for us, the early pressure and value we got out of the Skoos. Conversely, in game 2, the fact that our read was different based on the fact that we had Quagmire instead of Treetop Village, meaning that their potential turn 3 Liliana edicting us is a lot worse for us. The fact that we just kind of played draw go for a while, I think that ended up winning us the game. It got rid of their Raging Ravines in the first couple turns when they would have potentially been able to threaten our Liliana the Last Hope mid-game, something like that. Or maybe we would have had to block with a Bailoff. You know, who knows how that would have played out, but the fact that we got to play draw go, we got to take their really dangerous manlands off the field early on our own terms, and not spending fatal pushes to do so, that let us kind of enter the mid-game at parity, where their Bloodbraid Elves hit the field, their Bloodbraids were really good, but so was our Liliana the Last Hope, and then so was this Obstinate Bailoff was really, really good. Tireless Tracker helping to kind of shore up our advantage in the late game. So yeah, it turned out to be 2 really good games, 2 interactive games, 2 fun games, but 2 games that were, in my opinion, really decided by what we did in those first 3 turns. To Skoos or not to Skoos. That was the question of this match, and I think we made the right decision both times. So hopefully that was interesting and educational. I had a lot of fun playing this match. The BGX mirrors can be really fun. Sometimes, you know, it's strange for how interactive both decks are. Sometimes it feels like the top decks, and therefore luck, are kind of what decide things most. But, you know, and of course Magic is a game of variance, right? We all know this, but it's surprisingly relevant even in a match like this. Sometimes it feels that way anyway, but we still have to make the optimal plays, and I think here we pretty much did. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying this Golgari deck as spectators as much as I am piloting it. Stay tuned for the next one. Hopefully it will be in the very near future. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.